Good morning. Let's see. Well, I'm Carl Holtman. I'm the executive director at Hokyoji Zen Practice Community. And I want to introduce this morning our Sunday speaker, and that is Tim Macejak. Tim's actually on our board, and he's been involved in Zen practice for over 30 years. He began Zen practice at a teacherless sangha led by a group of experienced practitioners, and then practiced with a teacher at the Cedar Rapids Zen Center, followed by some years with an at-home practice. He has done a yearly retreat at Hokyoji since the early 90s and is currently president there. He's the author of the book Zen Unleashed, Everyday Buddhist Wisdom from Man's Best Friend, and that was released in 2013. And Tim has a story for us this morning called The Old Woman Who Burned Down the Monk's Hut. So interested to see that. And there you are, Tim. All right. Take it away, my friend.
Good morning, everyone. So I came across this story very early on in the book, Zen Flesh, Zen Bones, probably my first introduction to any sort of Zen material. And I like this story a lot. I wouldn't call it my favorite Zen story, but it's a very interesting one. And I think there's a lot of unexplored territory in it. And I also want to talk today about a way it relates to all of us that I don't think has been talked about much. But let me start by reading the story. So there was an old woman in China who had supported a monk for over 20 years. She had built a little hut for him and fed him while he was meditating. Finally, she wondered just what progress he had made in all this time. To find out, she obtained the help of a girl rich in desire. Go and embrace him, she told her, and then ask him suddenly, what now? The girl called upon the monk and without much ado caressed him, asking him what he was going to do about it. An old tree grows on a cold rock in winter, replied the monk somewhat poetically. Nowhere is there any warmth. The girl returned and related what he had said. To think I fed that fellow for 20 years, exclaimed the old woman in anger. She at once went to the hut of the monk and burned it down. So she didn't like how he responded to the woman. But what exactly did the monk do that was wrong? First, he followed the practice of being celibate. He didn't respond to seduction. And really kind of hard to look at on the surface what his flaws in his practice were. He's seemingly not swayed by desire and attachment, doesn't get all bent out of shape, replies calmly. Certainly he's meditated for 20 years, doing as the Buddha taught, and he's accepted support, just as the Buddha and his followers did. Everything seems a little bit textbook. But what the old woman says to the young girl when she comes back, she says, he showed no consideration for your need, no disposition to explain your condition. He need not have responded to passion, but at least he should have evidenced some compassion. So what she's angry about is that his practice is very much kind of me, that it's kind of the self-improvement program type of Buddhist practice. And he was really just worried about following the rule that the Buddha set out to be celibate. But that rule was there for a reason, to make it easier to practice, more focused, so that one could be compassionate. And the compassion was missing in her response. There's also potentially a couple precept violations here. We don't know because it's just a story, but do not be stingy, including with the Buddha's teachings. He kind of kept the Buddhist teachings to himself. There was an opportunity to teach. He's a monk, and he missed that opportunity. Also, don't raise yourself up by putting another person down. It's possible after being a monk for 20 years, this woman kind of letting loose her sexual desire, he just kind of looked down on, like, she's not practicing, and just kind of dismissed her that way in his mind. Now, the old woman gives advice he should have explained her condition. And for a monk can get away with being a little preachy, but even as a teacher, really a better response would be to start asking questions. Maybe along the line of, hold on a second here. It's kind of weird for someone to be hitting on a total stranger, and it's really kind of odd to be hitting on a monk. I mean, I'm a celibate. What's going on here? What's up with that? And just see how she responds. Also, one thing that's just slightly missing from the old woman's advice that he could have explained her condition is that the monk's first responsibility is actually to do no harm. That, he's been there without any female contact for 20 years. Maybe he won't be in a mental state to be giving Buddhist teaching. Maybe he needs to make sure no harm comes to the woman or to himself. Maybe he just needs to, excuse me, I'm celibate and you're just a little too much. I need to leave the hut, We can see, in our own practice, we're not monks. We're not really prone to giving teaching out to people. And sometimes our mental state is not going to be in that sort of situation. So take, for example, there's been someone at your workplace that's been stealing food out of the refrigerator for several years, and no one's figured out who it is. And once a week, someone's lunch goes away. And one day you catch the person. Maybe you're in a calm enough space, you could say, hey, what's going on? I see your car in the parking lot. It's a pretty nice car. Why are you stealing people's lunches? Maybe, though, your mental state is such that you briefly give them a piece of your mind and you go to a supervisor and report them. Maybe that's the biggest compassion you could do at the moment, and focus on just doing no harm. So the next question we might ask is, how did this monk come to have this misunderstanding? How did his practice get a little so me? And one thing we can see pretty clearly is he hasn't had a teacher, and he hasn't had any sangha. So for 20 years, he's been sitting and meditating by himself. For a lot of us, this can be our story to a great deal. It's pretty easy in the United States to live 50 miles from a Zen center, 100 miles, or we may live close, but our lives are busy. We have family with their own demands. We have our own things. We may not really end up at with contact with the teacher very often. And so we will be missing that one-on-one conversation time with that teacher. And he's got no contact with the sangha. And sangha gives a lot of feedback first, just by, not really feedback, but just by people sitting around talking. 4, 5, 6 Buddhists standing around talking about stuff. Things can come up that can give us feedback on our practice. Also, we can get feedback from sangha by asking a sangha member. We may even be more comfortable talking about something that's going on in our life with a fellow Buddhist practitioner than with a teacher. Maybe we're a little embarrassed to bring it up with the teacher. Typically, we're not going around to other sangha members and giving them feedback. We can do that every now and then, but by the second time you've gone up to someone saying, hey, you're doing that wrong, or, I think your understanding is that wrong, you're becoming an irritating person, not a helpful person. But there's times where we can give feedback unsolicited to another sangha member. We just have to be infrequent with it, kind of weigh it over and do it thoughtfully. One example that comes to my mind actually happened many, many years ago at my previous job. And it was my wife giving feedback to a coworker that had shown up to the local Zen center 3 or 4 times. And they were by the time clock just talking. And this coworker said, I don't know that I'm going to go back there again. The meditating, I just can't stop my thoughts. It really doesn't seem to me that my mind's just all over the place. And Teresa said, I'm not certain, but I don't think you're supposed to be trying to stop your thoughts. But I don't know for sure. He says, really? I thought that's what we were supposed to be doing. She says, I'm not a Buddhist. Maybe you should just talk to Tim about that. There was nothing for him to get defensive about. She said she wasn't for sure, and actually because she wasn't for sure. She'd been to a few Dharma talks. She'd been around me, but she had a feeling that wasn't kind of the right understanding. And she encouraged him, and it was important too, because he was talking about not coming back to the Zen Center again. I know in my life, someone said something to me that was very direct and actually pretty harsh, a sangha member, but it was something that I needed to hear at that time. So there's times and places where we can unsolicited give feedback to a sangha member, but usually that type of feedback comes from overhearing, just being involved in conversation, or for directly asking someone, this is kind of how I'm doing things. Does that seem odd to you? So that's the monk. Let's talk about the old woman here. And a lot of times the first thing that people say about the old woman is, oh my God, she burnt down the hut. And they say, oh, it's just a story. Don't worry about, the whole setting something on fire thing. And so the old woman kind of gets a pass. But I want to explore this old woman a lot more. And the first conclusion I think we can come to, at least that I came to, is that this old woman does not have a teacher herself, or sangha. And I come to that conclusion because when she tests the monk and the monk fails her test, she is surprised. But really, she should have expected it. And why should she have expected it? Well, what are the 3 refuges that we chant all the time? We take refuge in the Buddha, we take refuge in the sangha, and we take refuge in the Dharma. And this monk only has Dharma. Basically, if you think of the 3 refuges as a stool, the 3 legs of a stool, she's given him a 1-legged stool for 20 years. And then is surprised that he has some misunderstanding. Well, of course he does. He's been practicing on a 1-legged stool. And really, if you think about it, be practicing alone with no feedback from a teacher or sangha for 20 years. And the worst is he's a little self-centered in his practice. And there's people with teachers and sangha that do that anyway. If that's the worst, I say don't burn his hut down, pin a medal on the monk and say, good job. Let's talk about this way you reacted here, but my goodness, that's not so bad. We can also say that, let's take a look at her asking this young woman to go test the monk. Okay, that's actually a little weird. That's kind of not cool, actually. So what kind of, in the traditionally, to support a monk, you create good karma for yourself and to be kind to monks. And then the monk serves as an example and an inspiration for your own life. So to try and seduce the monk, what sort of bad karma are you creating for yourself? What sort of spiritual post-traumatic stress are you going to have to be living with? And this story has different versions of who's trying to seduce the monk. And this one here that I just read, it's someone rich in desire. Okay, is this someone that just sleeps around a lot and the old woman just picked someone that's kind of loose? So, then I thought, well, maybe this is a code for a prostitute, someone rich in desire. So, okay, yeah, she's going to have bad karma, but she's already created a ton of bad karma for herself. What's the harm now with her having a little more bad karma? In other versions, it's the woman has had a young girl bring the monk his food every day for years. So she's had this great noble service, and now we're just going to ask her, hey, seduce the monk today. Not cool. In other versions, it's her niece. So did she get her brother or sister's permission to have her daughter try and seduce a monk? So not only is the daughter going to have some problems, but I think we got a brother-sister or sister-sister spat coming up. Other version, it's her own daughter she's sending. Maybe that's child abuse. Hey, daughter, go try and seduce this monk. I want to test them. And she's like, I don't want to do that. And she's like, you listen to me. You're going to do as you're told. I mean, there's no version. They're all bad. So if the old woman had, let's say, a sangha, let's imagine 4 old women sitting around that morning, the day of, and they're having tea, and they're like, so what are you going to do today? She's like, oh, I'm going to go down to the river and wash my clothes. And what are you going to do today? And well, I'm going to test the monk. And well, how are you going to do that? It says, I'm going to have my daughter go down and try and seduce him and see what he does. Can you just hear the collective gasp from the other 3 women having tea? Can you just see the spit take one of them's going to do with their tea with this horrific idea? And they're going to be like, oh, dear, 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 there's got to be another way to test the monk. You don't want to have your daughter do that. But the old woman has no sangha, no teacher. So she comes up with this really bad idea to test the monk. And then let's take a look at how she expelled him. There's different versions. I mean, she burns the hut down. Some versions she yells at him and scolds him. Some versions she hits him with a stick before burning the hut down. But what was her complaint about the monk? That he didn't show any compassion. In fact, the title of this story is called No Loving Kindness. So did she show loving kindness toward the monk? Well, let's take a look at her own words that she used toward the monk and see if they can apply to her. She showed no consideration for his need, no disposition to explain his condition. She need not have just ignored the fact that he was cold, but at least she could have evidenced some compassion. Yeah, the word she used against the monk can be used on her. And isn't that kind of the way it goes? It's easier to see the flaws in someone else's practice than to see them in your own, even if it's the exact same thing. Then we can ask, am I showing compassion to the old woman right now? I mean, she didn't have a teacher, and I kind of ragging on her a bit, but she's fiction. The whole story's fiction, probably never happened. Everyone in it is make-believe. But actually, there's someone in the story that's not make-believe. So we should talk about them, and that's the storyteller. The person telling the story is a real live human being. Story first told 1,500 years ago, give or take a couple hundred years, been retold, different people telling different versions. So, and I understand the whole burning down the hut and yelling and hitting him with a stick because there's drama to that. The drama gets you to pay attention as a storyteller. You want your story retold. You want people to sit up and listen. But really, in all the tellings of this story, and I went through and I tried to find different versions, no version ever has the monk or the old woman explaining to the monk what he did wrong. So what's this going to look like in real life? So imagine the monk 5 minutes after she hits him with the stick, yells at him and burns his hut down. He's standing on the edge of a field, gasping for breath, having run away from this old woman beating him with a stick. He's standing there watching his hut in flames, and he's thinking, what in the heck just happened? I've been practicing for 20 years, and suddenly she just comes in and starts beating me and burns my hut down. What did I do? And then he thinks, I know what it is. She saw that woman come out of my hut the other day and just assumes I slept with her. Isn't that how attachment works? People just assume things and think the worst. She is just lost in suffering, and I get it. Thank goodness I have a strong Buddhist practice. Thank goodness that I've got the Dharma and all these years of meditating that I can move on. And he's just going to walk away thinking everything's just, he's the strong one and she's the weak one, and he's learned nothing. So in all these versions of this story, no one explains to the monk what he did wrong. There's no understanding the story that practice isn't always a straight line. We don't go from 0 to perfection. We go 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And none of the storytellers have any inkling to try and show by example. I mean, she's not exactly teaching anything by example. She had a wonderful opportunity here to show compassion toward him. And then let's take a look at the whole exploitation of the girl. I mean, all these different versions, I spent some time trying to think which version is least offensive. The prostitute, the niece, they're all bad. Some versions don't say anything about who the girl is. They just say, she sent a young girl down to test them. So it's just left up very blank slate. But I did come across one person who tried to fix this part of the story. So I wanted to read this very different version of the story that I came across. So here we go. Version number 2. I have heard about one old woman. She served a Buddhist monk for 30 years, did everything for that monk. She was just like a mother and a disciple both. And the Buddhist monk meditated and meditated and meditated. The day the old woman was going to die, she called a prostitute from the town and said, "Go to that monk's hut, enter the hut, go near him, caress the monk, and just come and tell me how he reacts. This night I am going to die, and I want to be certain whether I was serving a man who is innocent. I am not certain." The prostitute became afraid. She said, "He is such a good man, so saintly. We have never seen such a saintly man." Even the prostitute felt guilty to go there and touch this man, but the old woman bribed her. She went, she opened the door. The monk was meditating. It was midnight. In that isolated part, nobody was near. The monk opened his eyes, looked at the prostitute, jumped to his feet and said, "Why are you coming in? Get out." His whole body trembled. The prostitute went nearer. The monk jumped out of the hut and cried, "This woman is trying to seduce me." The prostitute returned. She told the whole thing, and the old woman sent her servants to burn the hut of the monk. She said, "This man is of no use. He has not become innocent yet. He may be a saint, but his saintliness is ugly. It is manipulated. Why should he see a prostitute so suddenly? A woman was entering, not a prostitute. Why should he think that she had come to seduce him? He should have been at least gentlemanly. He should have said, 'Come, sit. Why have you come?' He should have at least shown a little compassion. And even if she had embraced him, why should he be afraid? He has been telling me for 30 years, I am not the body. If he is not the body, then why should he be so much afraid of the body? No, the saintliness is cultivated. It is opposed. It is not from the inner, it is from the outer. He has managed it all right, but inside he is not innocent. He is not childlike." So the things he changed, this author changed. First, the woman's on her deathbed. So she's doing some things that aren't cool, but she's on her deathbed. We kind of give people a pass on that. They're a little bit desperate to evaluate their life. The young woman doesn't want to seduce the monk. She's a real human being in this story. She expresses concern and about doing such a thing, but the old woman bribes her, which tells us that this young woman is poor and in need of the money. So she's put in a situation where she's kind of blameless, and the old woman's bribing her, but again, she's on her deathbed. Then the reaction to the monk's a little bit different. The woman never gets close enough to actually touch him. He makes assumptions right from the start. So this storyteller has introduced something different. Rather than one message, there's a couple messages that they decided they wanted to tell. They kind of water down the one message that he's kind of self-centered and lacking compassion. The storyteller has that right. And there's this whole introduction of an idea of being childlike. And this particular teacher had been talking about Benkai, the Zen teacher, when telling the story. And Benkai talked a lot about the childlike state. So they're introducing kind of their own predilection toward practice and in their kind of their own idea here. But anyway, nice. They made an attempt to change the story. A few things I don't like about it as much, but they didn't just go along with how it's always been told. They tried to fix some things in it. So it may sound like I don't like this story. I've come up with all these things wrong with it, but I actually like it quite a bit. Two main reasons. One of them, just like in the movies, at the end of a movie where they'll say, no animals were harmed in the making of this movie, I can say confidently that no young women were harmed in the telling of this story. It's total fiction, and this story does one thing really, really well. It kind of exposes our own predilection toward being self-centered in our practice. Because when we hear this story, and when we hear that the monk, didn't respond to the attempt of seduction, our first millisecond thought most likely is, good job, monk. We're not thinking, oh, not compassionate. Our first thought is, you didn't allow yourself to be seduced. You followed the rule. We may even be the type of person that doesn't like rules a lot, but still we're conditioned. Rules are important. And that's the first thing we often see. And then we're surprised when we hear that the old woman burns down the hut, and then she explains why. And we're like, of course, I should have seen that myself. So I really like how the story has a surprise factor, and that it has the potential anyway to trick us. It tricked me anyway. The second thing I like about this story is that everyone in the story, maybe not the young girl, but the old woman and the monk and the storytellers all have one thing in common. They all have great strengths in their practice, some real wisdom, and they all have some things that they're unseen mistakes or misunderstandings in the practice. So this monk practicing for 20 years by herself, that's not easy. And to not get rattled when the woman tried to seduce him, not easy, but misunderstanding, missing an opportunity for compassion. The old woman, a great strength. She understands the practice is about compassion toward others first and foremost, and the rules are just there to help that. Deep wisdom. But she complains the monk shows no compassion, and she does the exact same thing herself. Sees the flaws in others and doesn't see it in herself. And using the young woman, prostitute, niece, daughter, whoever it is, misunderstanding. And the storytellers, just telling the story without, and then you got this one person who fixed it. Well, the person who fixed it was Osho, formerly known as Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh. And he has kind of a reputation. I went on the Wikipedia, and a very long article, and I tried, I need to summarize this for people who don't know who Osho is. And summarizing Osho is not easy, but here is my attempt at doing it. He founded a religion that was without a lot of traditional dogma. He quoted Zen teachers a lot. He once owned 93 Rolls Royces, and in a legal compromise left the country over immigration fraud charges. So we can say someone with a lot of wisdom and someone with some misunderstandings. So the old woman, the monk, the storytellers are all like this, and it's actually our story. We all have things in our practice that we have really smart wisdom on. And then maybe there's some things that we know from self-reflection that are flaws in our practice. I can think of several things in my practice that are just kind of screaming out loud. They're not hidden. I know they're flaws. But then there's our hidden misunderstandings. And what hidden misunderstandings do I have? Well, I don't know them, because if I knew them, they wouldn't be hidden and they wouldn't be misunderstandings. So this story is a good vehicle to realize that, to encourage us to all be, first, to, as much as we can, not practice on the one-legged stool. That make some effort to have individual contact with teachers, one-on-one conversation. I know when I go to retreats, there's opportunity for this. And a lot of times in the past, I would not take advantage of it because I really didn't have anything to talk about. But I kind of force myself to go now, even if I have no burning questions. And a lot of times it's just an ordinary conversation, just checking in, kind of talking how things are going. But sometimes something surprising comes up, and I give myself the space for that to happen. And then to make sure we have contact with sangha, those conversations where we're just sitting around with other practitioners and just talking, or seeking out a sangha member and getting their advice on something that we think we know that we're doing it right, but we just want to, double check with somebody else. And the other thing this story can inspire us to do is to really be awake to discovering something new. That this old woman, there's nothing to prevented her the next morning to having woken up and said, wow, I just did the same thing I was criticizing the monk for doing. I just showed no compassion toward him. She can wake up to that completely on her own, and we have the ability, without contact with the teacher or sangha, to come to our own waking up. We just have to be aware that we probably do have things we're not understanding right, and to be available to the opportunity to open up and see those things. And that's it. That's my talk for today. And there's time for questions or comments or things to share.
Well, thanks, Tim. This story is very reminiscent of burning down the monk's hut. Thich Nhat Hanh, in one of his early books, tells a story when he was in the monastery as a training monk. There was a monk there that had a little hut that was off to the side, and he never associated with any of the other sangha members. He would come to the services and the sittings, and then he would get his food and he would go back to his hut, and he wouldn't interact with any of the other sangha members. And Thich Nhat Hanh tells that they got together with the other monks, and when he was gone, they went and they burned his hut down. And it was a way to force him to embrace the other people there, and not just this solitary existence, which they knew was not good for him. It was an interesting thing to justify burning down somebody's hut, as an act of compassion to help this person along the path. And so that kind of gives another a perspective on the old lady. Maybe it was an act of compassion to force him out of his solitary mindset. Who knows? Anyway, I hadn't heard those other stories, but they fit very well with some of the rest of us. So, thanks,
Jen.
Well, first I have to say that's the most generous characterization of Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh I've ever heard. There's a very good documentary on, I think, Netflix, like 6-part documentary, and it's hard to tell exactly what Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh is about, but the people around him had some real issues.
Yes.
So I first heard the story of the old woman and the monk from Nonan many, many years ago, and he had a very different perspective that, since you're interested in a lot of different perspectives, you might be interested in. His feeling was, and the way he taught it was, that the monk was being dishonest in saying that he had no warmth, that he was like a dead branch in winter or whatever. That's not the goal of that's not the goal of Zen practice, to become dead to the world. That passion would rise up. It's just how you relate to it. It's things are going to rise up, and it's not that he was supposed to be seduced, but he was supposed to at least admit honestly that he had something happen, that, and so he was trying to be something that he was not. And that was the issue with the story. And that's why the old woman was mad, was he was off in this world of idealization and not dealing with reality. So that's what I've gone through with that story. and lived with for, I don't know, a long, long time now. So.
Well, I like that a lot, that his response either was he's trained himself in some sort of weird sort of way, or it was dishonest. That
Yeah.
And the dishonesty actually is interesting, because another thing which I forgot to mention was, what was plan B if the monk responded to the passion? Oh, never mind, I was just here to test you. That might make someone get really angry or whatever. I mean, that's really putting the woman in harm's way more than just, her karma. But fine. We're not hearing you, even though you're unmuted. Oh, bummer.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. I feel kind of like I'm a different side is coming up in terms of I see the old woman kind of projecting her expectations on the teacher, and maybe has built him up into this person that he may or may not be. And so when her illusion or disillusion, whatever is delusion, is kind of shattered or broken, that creates anger. And she's just like, well, damn it all to hell, I'm going to burn his head down, so it's like her, I see it more, the story is more of a reflection of her own practice, and just that when we kind of build this person, this teacher who's also human, it shows his humanness, and that we're all in these different, varying places of our growth and our practice and learning, and that's the compassion we need to have for each other, is that we're not perfect, and and so it's like, but I think we need each other to help point out these weaknesses that we need to work on, in a compassionate way, that he was actually holding kind of a mirror up to her, so in his fallibility, it triggered in her this projection she was having, and illuminated that, and then so if anything, she learned, I hope, just as much out of her own reaction to help her grow in ways as he might see, okay, here's someone reacting, and she's doing what she needs to do to be able to grow and to learn, and to hopefully not take it personally himself, I don't know. That's all I got. But thank you for sharing that. That was really a fun story to think about from different perspectives.
That's really an excellent idea, that the teachers and monks can be put up on this pedestal. And that's kind of a fiction. And also, probably maybe magnified, she's been supporting him for 20 years. So she's thinking of all the money she spent, which is another, you're supposed to be giving that freely, not with expectations. So there's two things. And yeah, the seeds are there for her to wake up like a mirror and see, wow, a few days later to reflect and think, that was pretty violent what I just did. Juan, do you have speaker yet? No.
Yeah, I think so. Can you hear me?
I can hear. Yes.
Everybody else?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I guess I agree with everyone in a way, because I think this is one of those tricky stories where, there's learning from every angle, but nothing is necessarily right. I just hate those. But it seems to me like this is a question of how do we react when someone bumps up against our comfort, i.e., our attachments. And the monk could have asked the young woman, could have said, I'm sorry, my dear, I'm celibate, but would you take a meal with me? The old woman could have gone herself and said, I am close to dying and I'm deeply troubled. Could you please help me? Can we have a conversation? But we don't do this because we're very self-righteous. We always want to feel like we are on the line of the correct, that our compass is the true one, that we understand the Dharma, that our understanding of the Dharma is the one that, is definite. But I think that maybe the underlying moral of this story is that we really need connection with other people to find understanding and comfort. That it doesn't come from the things we're attached to, but that is really difficult in the modern world. And so my question to you, Tim, is, given that we are we tend to be kind of protective of ourselves and our families, and we in this society, I think even more and more, we kind of push other people out. We want to maintain, the fortress. And so how does one today in life kind of chin up to that challenge?
I would say, I don't know if this will be an adequate answer, but hanging out with sangha members or conversing with the teacher are enjoyable. So we have to make time for it, and there may be part of us that has this island mentality, but I don't know, am I answering your question?
Yeah, there's no real answer. What I think is that the sort of personal attributes that the story kind of rustles up are difficult in the circumstances that we live in right now. And I'm always thinking of that myself. I have been hurt at times by being too open to other people, and sort of like, and so then that makes it more difficult to do it the next time.
Right.
And but on the other hand, when someone bothers me, that is all about me, and how and now I have an opportunity to grow by my reaction to it. But it's so hard to remember that, this is a growth opportunity. How do I best broker this so that we can, both have mutually a good experience? It's really difficult.
Yeah, well, that is opening up to someone and then getting hurt would make it harder to open up again. One could explore a little more reflectively where that hurt comes from, and maybe it's totally the other person, but maybe there's something in our own thinking that's being challenged that we're not willing to let be challenged. And I'd also say, yeah, and they say everybody's a Buddha. Sometimes the most annoying person in your life is a Buddha because they can teach you things. But at the initial spot, do not harm. That comes first and foremost. You can get all reflective and learn later, but do not harm right when they're pushing your buttons. That's first obligation. And I guess I just say, interact with other people. Sometimes a little bit can go a long way. Some people really work a lot of hours, and, to be around other people, other than their family, but family's good feedback anyway, but besides that, if one's opportunities to be around other sangha are limited, still when they're there, it can be beneficial.
Yeah, thank you.
Erin.
There we go. It's interesting because I also read that book, Zen Flesh, Zen Bones, when I was in, I think I was in college. So just kind of, also my first introduction. And so I have also thought about that story for a while. And one of the things I really appreciated about your approach was bringing in the storyteller. And it's a point of view, there are lots of points of view here, and that's one that I hadn't really thought of. So I thought that was awesome. And I was thinking, a good storyteller, what it means to be a good storyteller. And I think, if you explain too much, first of all, people don't like to be explained to. So a better story kind of puts it out there. And here we are centuries later still discussing this story, and maybe that's partly why, because he didn't sort of, and also it's limiting if you say, well, the moral is this. I'm not suggesting you're saying that, but it sort of got me thinking. But the thing I think about is that's kind of a little bit of it could in life, kind of a dangerous approach, because we try to use our words and so on, keep things from escalating, that sort of thing. We practice that very diligently. But life is, life is messy. We're not always in a position to sort of be able to analyze everything right on the spot and produce a, well-considered response. I mean, that's just the way life is. But yeah, it also reminds me of the precepts a little bit. There's no, this is right, this is wrong, and do this. And which of course it makes us think about all those angles of the precepts. And I don't know, just a really great story. And I, again, just thanks for pointing that out.
Well, I guess that's the end of the discussions. Anybody else have anything? Juan did get to post his comments in the chat box if you want to take a look at those before we disappear here, because his microphone is not working. Tim, thank you very much. Thanks everybody for coming in and sharing this with each other. Next week, Shoto Spring, Reverend Shoto Spring is going to be giving a talk, so please join us then. Also, we do rely on the donations of our supporters, and there is a little link in the chat box on where you can make a little donation to Hokyoji. A couple of announcements. We've got a couple of work weekends coming up later in the month. We've got the spring work weekend where we change Hokyoji back over to the warm weather thing. So we've got some chores and things like that. If it's a free event, you come down and work for a couple of days, and we'll feed you and give you a nice room to stay in. You can enjoy it. The following weekend is Caring for the Land weekend, where we go out and work on taking care of the surrounding properties. Anyway, you can find that information on the website. So please consider that. And thank you. We can close with the 4 vows. Beings are numberless. I vow to free them. Illusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. The Buddha way is unsurpassable. I vow to realize it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Bye.